Welcome to Wisconsin in Focus. I'm Bruce Walker, Great Lakes Regional Editor for the Center Square. You may recall back in the day the sound of dial-ups and all of that as you were trying to get online and maybe getting bumped off all of the time. Or, if you're a certain age, maybe you recall never even having the internet, not even having that as an option. Well, there continued to be questions about more than $100 million in coronavirus stimulus money that Wisconsin spent on broadband internet expansion. Senator Eric Wimberger from Green Bay on Wednesday questioned the state's Public Service Commission about last September's audit that stated there was almost no tracking of what was spent, what work was done, or if the new internet access even worked. So joining me today to discuss what this all means for Wisconsin is the Center Square's Wisconsin correspondent, Benjamin Yount.
Let's talk the internet.
Let's talk about the internet. I'm older than you, so I actually remember when you have to go to libraries and such, or newspaper stands to get magazines and whatnot to read about what was going on in the world. You didn't have to just, stumble over to your desk and hope that you have internet connection. And I also recall when AOL went to a flat rate and you would get bumped off.
It's not quite dial-up in some of the rural parts of Wisconsin, but I've got friends who live out in the sticks, as they put it, and they can watch Netflix or they can check their email. They can't do both. And that's kind of the idea behind all of this, is to bring faster internet to most people. But as you hit, perfectly, on the nose in the T's, there are questions as to, was any of this work actually done? And did they do something more than just dig a trench, throw some cables in and say, that's close enough, and collect their check? And the reality is we don't really have those answers.
Right. You have laying the cables and the fiber optics, all very important. But there's also the last mile. How do you get it from one area into people's houses so that they can actually use it? And recall that this was all money that was part of the COVID stimulus money that was sent out to individuals who relied on this as a conduit to the outside world, especially students who were doing distance learning.
In Wisconsin, the focus on broadband internet expansion is in two places. One, it's in the sticks. It's in the rural parts of Wisconsin where, as you said, you may have to still go to a library to get fast internet, or where your choices are generally sort of over the air satellite, and it bounces off a church tower and comes to the receiver at your house, and it works. You have the internet. You can connect to the modern world, but you can't do what people say in the suburbs can. The other focus is in Milwaukee, in older inner city neighborhoods, lower income inner city neighborhoods, where there's not the infrastructure, the new infrastructure. And we know this over the years, that you'll have education officials, you'll have social scientists who will point out that for a good number of people who live in those neighborhoods, mom's phone is the only internet connection that they have. So there are a lot of people who were promised broadband service when everyone went home to learn, when the federal government started sending money out the door for all manners of things during the coronavirus. They were promised that they would get broadband internet service. Republicans at the Capitol like this idea. Democrats at the Capitol like this idea. Governor Evers can't go more than 2 or 3 weeks without talking about how he loves this idea. And so, the questions this week really go back to an audit that we wrote about in September of last year. And the Legislative Audit Bureau, again, one of my favorite 3-letter acronyms, LAB, took a look at just a handful of these grants, about $5 million of the $100 million that the Public Service Commission spent. And what the auditors found was that there was zero accountability. Nobody knows how the companies were picked to do which project. There really wasn't even a confirmation that the project was done, much less that the project actually works. Flash forward to this week, lawmakers are back. It's the spring session, and Eric Wimberger and Bob Whitkey from over in Racine, state senator, state representative, held a hearing where they had the Public Service Commission come and testify to ask what's going on. And the answer that they got was that this is basically self-reporting, that the state of Wisconsin is trusting companies to report on whether or not they earned the chunk of $100 million that they gave. And it doesn't take too much of a tinfoil hatted conspiracy theory to see that that could be problematic. And Wimberger said that he wants this program, this grant, this broadband expansion to be a success. But he says they've got to learn, they've got to have the specifics to know, because they can't just trust everybody's word. The honor system doesn't so much work when you're talking about $100 million.
I didn't want to cut you off, but at some given point in time, as you were beginning your response, I was thinking, wait, what? There's no metrics that are being examined here to see where the money is going and whether they're achieving what they set out to do. There's no accountability there.
Yeah. And this is sort of, again, there are two questions that come from that. The first and the easiest is the companies. If you go and you hire XYZ Excavating to lay fiber optic over 12 miles between Neenah and whatever is 12 miles outside of Neenah, you can track that. You can drive up, you can look, you can have the company should have receipts. You can track that easily. It's better done prospectively. Okay, give us the documentation, then we give you your money. The problem and the real concern that Wimberger has is on the other side. How did these projects get selected? Where did the governor's office decide the money should be spent? And how did they decide? Was this all political? Was this all based on diversity, equity, and inclusion? Was this a flip of a coin? And that's the frustrating thing that Wimberger said after the hearing, that they don't know. We could be looking at $1 billion for broadband internet between what the state is looking to spend and what the federal government is looking to spend. And if the governor's office doesn't have any indication as to, or any documentation, any explanation as to how they chose who got this money, that's an awful large opportunity for fraud. And the quote that we used in the piece from Wimberger that I think is getting a lot of the attention is that, where there's smoke, there's fire. I've been camping in the rain, but where there's smoke, there's definitely something hot. And he said that there is no evidence of wrongdoing yet. And one more thing to add to this. This is not the first time with coronavirus money that lawmakers have asked the governor, how did you decide where you were going to spend this money? And they got nothing in response. Wimberger mentioned it just in an offhanded comment during the news conference on Wednesday. He said that the decision-making has been classified as notes and not public information as part of the process of spending money. And notes are off the books. You can't FOIA notes. Those are personal work documents. And governors, administrations need some privacy. But to declare that we're going to spend $100 million and not tell anyone how the decisions were made, and then when the agencies show up, because this isn't just PSC, there are other state agencies that have spent their share of coronavirus money who couldn't tell or wouldn't tell anyone how they made their decisions. This is part of a pattern where it looks, as Wimberger put it, that the governor was just throwing money out the door willy-nilly without any real accountability, not just to taxpayers as, hey, here's where your money is going, but accountability as to where this money went and if it did anything that it was supposed to do.
I think at the very least, one should expect some degree of transparency as to the answers to the questions that you just asked.
Yeah, and this is what happens. This is what the legislature, this is what the audit bureau, this is what the audit commission is supposed to do. We had 4 years where, to borrow the line from the wonderful ESPN 30 for 30 documentary on the University of Miami, the U, for the first 4 years of his time as governor, Tony Evers governed with both middle fingers extended to the legislature. There was hope in this term, his second term, that perhaps there would be less of an adversarial relationship, but hearings like the one we reported on Wednesday don't lend any hope to that. Don't expect the governor to roll back the birds as he goes forward, particularly with lawmakers asking questions about just how he spent all that coronavirus money.
Okay, well, that despite his perception that he shared last week in another one of your stories that he thought that there was a aura of bipartisanship that was beginning to permeate.
He hoped for a little less anger.
Yes.
Yeah, he was hopeful. That was last week. This is this week. Next week will be next week.
Okay. All right. Well, listeners can keep up with the story and more at thecentersquare.com and find more stories by Benjamin Yount. This is Bruce Walker, Great Lakes Regional Editor for the Center Square. Please subscribe and thank you very much for listening.